The glass shattered before anyone saw his hand move. Gregory Stanton, the billionaire tech genius, glared at the waitress kneeling beside the mess he'd made. "Get your dirty hands off my table," he hissed, his voice sharp enough to slice through the murmuring crowd of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Water dripped across his expensive napkins, covered in scribbled equations. Equations he claimed would change the world. "Look what you've done," he sneered. "This proof stumped MIT's best minds for months. You just ruined history." The diners watched in uneasy silence as Elena Brooks, a waitress in a wrinkled uniform, knelt among the shards of crystal. Her eyes flicked once at the numbers bleeding through the paper, and in that single glance she saw it, his mistake. While the billionaire mocked her, she quietly solved what he believed was impossible. That night, in front of 700 million people, the same woman he humiliated would stand on the world's biggest stage and prove that genius doesn't wear designer suits, it wears courage. Manhattan glowed that evening the way only cities of money and power can glow. The streets shimmered after a light rain, taxi lights bending through puddles like melted gold. Inside Le Bernard, the city's most exclusive restaurant, a different kind of storm was building. Every table shimmered under crystal light, linen folded with military precision, and the air thick with quiet orchestral music meant to make millionaires feel immortal. Elena Brooks moved among them like a shadow no one noticed. The black and white uniform she wore had been ironed so many times it had lost its crispness. Her sneakers squeaked faintly against marble tiles that cost more than her monthly rent. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew exactly how invisible she was. In the dining room of Titans, she existed only when needed and disappeared the moment she served her purpose. Her table tonight was number 12, reserved for Gregory Stanton, founder of Quantum Span Technologies, billionaire, philanthropist when cameras were on, predator when they weren't. He was seated alone at a table that could have held 6. In front of him lay 3 napkins covered in scribbled numbers, symbols, and fragments of proof written in an impatient scrawl. His wine glass caught the light like a ruby trapped in crystal. Elena approached quietly, the pitcher in her hand half filled with water that reflected the chandelier's warm glow. She hesitated at his shoulder, just long enough to say softly, "Would you like a refill, sir?" He didn't look up. His pen scratched furiously, equations spilling across napkin fibers. She thought he hadn't heard her, so she reached forward gently, careful not to disturb the notes. The motion was calm, graceful, professional, until his voice cut through the music like a blade. "Get your dirty hands off my table." The words struck harder than the shove that followed. His hand lashed out, knocking hers away, water sloshing from the pitcher and spreading across the napkins in an expanding circle. The crystal glass tipped, rolling across the table and shattering on the marble floor. The sound echoed through the dining room, silencing every fork and conversation. Elena froze. The water spread toward the napkins, the ink bleeding into blue-black clouds. Gregory Stanton rose slowly, a man used to being taller, louder, more right than anyone around him. His tailored suit stretched as he stood, every movement deliberate, a performance for his audience. "Look what you've done." He held one of the napkins up, dripping wet, letters blurring into nonsense. "This proof stumped MIT's finest for months." He raised his voice, making sure the entire room could hear. "Do you have any idea what this is?" Elena wanted to speak, but her voice caught behind her ribs. Her face flushed with heat as she bent down to pick up the shards of glass. The room watched her without helping, fascinated by the theater of humiliation. Gregory Stanton laughed, the kind of laugh that belonged to men who mistook cruelty for intelligence. "Solve this," he said, waving the ruined napkin like a flag. I'll give you everything I own." He enjoyed the power of that moment, the way people smiled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or remain silent. Then he swept his arm across the table. Salt, pepper, and 2 crystal glasses crashed to the floor in a sparkling rain. "Now clean it up. That's what your people are good for." The words hung heavy in the air. Elena knelt slowly, the back of her neck burning under the weight of staring eyes. Her hands shook as she picked up the fragments. Somewhere near the bar, someone whispered that Stanton had a temper, but genius often came with eccentricity. While she gathered the pieces, her gaze flicked across the table, at the napkins soaked with ink and water. The symbols weren't random. They were lines of calculus, convergence sequences, familiar patterns from a world she had once belonged to. Her heart thudded. There, buried among the scrawl, she saw it, an unbalanced term, a misplaced negative sign, the mathematical equivalent of a missing heartbeat. For a fraction of a second, the humiliation faded. Her mind began to hum. The noise of the restaurant blurred into silence. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was Elena Brooks again, the student who had spent nights at MIT surrounded by whiteboards filled with equations like constellations. Her manager's voice cut through the moment. "Elena, what the hell happened here?" Tom Becker, red-faced and sweating, hurried over. He glanced at Stanton, then at the spilled mess. "I told you to stay invisible tonight," he hissed under his breath. "Those VIPs decide whether this restaurant keeps its reputation. One wrong move and you're gone." Elena opened her mouth, but he grabbed her arm. "Don't say a word. Clean it up, then stay out of sight until close." Gregory Stanton had already returned to his seat, scribbling new numbers on a fresh napkin as if nothing had happened. Elena nodded silently. She cleaned in silence, her mind running parallel calculations, not about tips or shifts, but about the equations she'd glimpsed. When the mess was gone and the chatter resumed, she retreated toward the kitchen. The door swung open, and the noise of boiling pots and shouted orders flooded her senses. She placed the broken glass in a bin, washed her trembling hands, and leaned against the cold metal counter. Her reflection stared back at her in the steel surface. Tired eyes, dark circles, a strand of hair sticking to her cheek. The uniform made her blend into the walls. She used to wear lab coats and speak in the language of numbers. Now she recited menu specials and pretended not to exist. 3 years ago, she'd been 1 semester away from earning her doctorate in mathematics at MIT. Then, life had intervened. Her father's construction accident, her mother's insulin bills, her younger brother's autism therapy, numbers that didn't belong in equations but in unpaid invoices. She had chosen family over ambition, believing she could come back later. But later never came. Now she was 28, working double shifts, sending half her paycheck to her grandmother in Queens, and trying not to think about the library in Cambridge where her thesis still gathered dust. Tom brushed past her again. "Brooks, table 12's dessert order. Move." She took a deep breath, carried the tray back out. Stanton didn't even glance at her when she set down the souffle. His eyes were fixed on his napkins, confident, self-satisfied. The air around him smelled faintly of arrogance and money. As she turned to leave, she caught fragments of conversation from the nearby tables. "Hartwell's challenge this year is supposed to be impossible," a woman in diamonds whispered to her companion. "Something about infinite sequences and convergence theory. My husband's research team spent 2 years on it," said the other. "They're calling it the convergence paradox. No solution exists." Elena's hand froze mid-air. Convergence theory. Her mind began connecting threads. She had written her undergraduate thesis on convergence patterns in infinite series. It was her language, her first love. She continued clearing plates while her thoughts raced through forgotten proofs and theorems. At another table, a man was explaining to his date, "The preliminary rounds are just warm-ups. Stanton always saves his impossible proof for last. What makes him so confident no one can solve it?" she heard her ask. "Because he's Gregory Stanton," the man replied. "He's never been wrong about mathematics." The words stung more than they should have. She had once believed in that same kind of certainty, the belief that numbers were pure and people were not. But the past few years had taught her that even equations could be corrupted by ego. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. A notification from a science blog she still followed. "The $1 Million Math Challenge begins in 1 hour at Lincoln Center." Her stomach tightened. She could picture it clearly. The stage, the cameras, the applause. She used to dream of standing there, competing among the world's best. Now she stood among empty glasses, holding a tray instead of a whiteboard marker. Tom's voice snapped her back. "Table 12 needs their check. Move it." Elena delivered the bill, avoiding Stanton's eyes. When she returned to the kitchen, the clock above the stove read 8:37 p.m. Her shift ended at 9. The competition started at 9:30. Lincoln Center was 12 blocks away. She finished her last task in silence, stacking dishes, wiping counters. Tom barked something about closing procedures, but she didn't hear him. The thought had already taken root, a dangerous, impossible thought. At 9:03 p.m., she stood in the narrow alley behind the restaurant. The night air smelled of rain and garbage, but beyond the rooftops, she could see the distant glow of Lincoln Center's golden arches. Her heart pounded like a drum she couldn't silence. "You can't go there," she told herself. "You're not a mathematician anymore. You're a waitress." But her other hand clenched the folded napkin she had rescued from the trash. Gregory Stanton's ruined equations. The ink had dried into a blur, but she remembered every number. She'd spotted the error in less than 30 seconds. Her mind whispered what her fear tried to silence. "You could fix it." She laughed softly, the sound half hysteria, half disbelief. It was absurd. She hadn't touched advanced mathematics in 3 years. She didn't even own a working laptop. She didn't have credentials, invitations, or the right to walk through those glass doors. But she had truth, and truth was still hers. She stuffed the napkin into her pocket and started walking. Each step felt like defiance. The city's hum grew louder, the pulse of traffic merging with her heartbeat. Billboards flashed news about the challenge. Crowds were already gathering at Lincoln Center's plaza, holding tickets, sipping champagne. She blended into the shadows, slipping through a side entrance into the public viewing area. Giant screens glowed, showing the stage inside where Dr. Margaret Hale was speaking. Her voice was steady, commanding, a contrast to the anxious chatter of the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "tonight we gather for the 15th annual $1 Million Math Challenge. The total prize pool exceeds $50 million. The audience erupted in applause. On the screen, Gregory Stanton stood near the judge's table, his arrogance radiating even through the camera lens. The sight of him made Elena's chest tighten. The same man who had reduced her to silence hours ago was now basking in global admiration. Her phone buzzed again, a text from her grandmother. "Did you finish work early? Don't stay up too late, sweetheart." Elena smiled sadly. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. Around her, people in suits and gowns clapped and cheered as if they were watching a sporting event. Inside the hall, Dr. Hale continued introducing the contestants. Daniel Price from Harvard, Amelia Rhodes from Oxford, Ethan Zhao from MIT. Elena's breath caught when she heard the last name. Ethan had been her classmate, her friend, the one who used to bring her coffee during late-night problem sets. He had finished the doctorate she never could. For a moment, she imagined him on that stage, solving problems, making history. Then her eyes fell on Stanton, the man who claimed perfection and used it to crush those beneath him. Something inside her shifted. Invisible people, she thought, stay invisible because they believe they have to. The screen showed Stanton lifting a sheet of paper filled with complex equations. His voice boomed through the speakers. "Tonight, I present the convergence paradox, a proof my team has worked on for 3 years. It demonstrates that certain infinite sequences cannot converge under any known mathematical framework." The audience murmured, awed. Stanton smiled like a prophet. "This proof has been verified by Stanford, Caltech, and Princeton. It represents the absolute limit of human mathematical understanding. If anyone can find even the smallest error," he declared, "I will personally write them a check for everything I own. My companies, my properties, my entire fortune, $50 billion. Gasps filled the air. Social media feeds exploded around her. Elena felt her heart slam against her ribs. In her pocket, the napkin burned like a brand. She knew exactly where his proof failed. Her hands trembled as she pushed through the crowd. Security guards blocked her path near the auditorium doors. "Excuse me, miss. This area is for contestants and VIP guests only." "I need to speak with Dr. Hale," she said, her voice steady though her pulse raced. "It's about the mathematical proof." The guard laughed. "Lady, half the people here think they can solve $1 million math problem. That's not how this works." But inside the hall, Dr. Margaret Hale had noticed the commotion. She moved closer, her curiosity piqued. "What seems to be the problem?" Elena took out the folded napkin, its edges frayed, the ink smeared. "There's an error in equation 7 of the convergence paradox. The sign convention switches from positive to negative iteration without justification." Dr. Hale blinked, taken aback by the precision of the statement. The surrounding cameras turned. The auditorium fell into silence. Gregory Stanton froze mid-sentence, his arrogance cracking for the first time that night. "Who said that?" he demanded. Dr. Hale turned to the security guard. "Let her in." As Elena stepped through the doorway and into the blinding light of the auditorium, every eye followed her. A waitress uniform in a sea of designer suits, a nobody walking into the temple of genius. But mathematics, she thought, doesn't care about uniforms. It only cares about truth, and she was about to remind them of that. The great auditorium of Lincoln Center pulsed with energy as Elena Brooks stepped into its light. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. 1,000 faces turned toward her at once, rows upon rows of spectators whose murmurs blended into an oceanic hum. Cameras panned, lights flared. Her black and white uniform looked absurd against the glitter of gowns and tuxedos. Somewhere far behind her, the doors clicked shut, cutting off her only escape route. On stage, Gregory Stanton stood motionless, a single eyebrow arched. His hand still gripped the sheet of paper covered in equations. The audience watched, suspended between curiosity and disbelief. A waitress had interrupted the most prestigious mathematics competition on Earth. Dr. Margaret Hale, director of the challenge, broke the silence first. "Miss, please step forward," she said, voice calm but carrying authority. Elena's knees felt hollow as she crossed the carpet. Each step echoed too loudly, betraying the tremor in her legs. She stopped beside the judge's table, clutching the soggy napkin in both hands like a talisman. Gregory Stanton finally spoke. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" His tone was almost bored, but his eyes, burned with anger, barely held in check. Elena swallowed hard. There's an error in equation 7 of your proof, sir. The iteration sign changes from positive to negative without adjustment to the convergence boundary. It invalidates the conclusion. The room drew in a collective breath. Dr. Hale glanced toward the big screen where the equations glowed in neat white lines. Her assistant zoomed in on the 7th formula, the one Elena had mentioned. For a long second, only the whisper of air conditioning filled the silence. "Who are you?" Stanton demanded. "A journalist? A fan? This event isn't open to spectators." "I used to study mathematics at MIT, Elena said quietly. 3 years of doctoral research before I—" She hesitated. "Before I had to leave." Laughter rippled through the upper rows. Someone whispered, "She's bluffing." Another voice said, "MIT dropout, huh? Figures." Elena felt heat creep up her neck, but Dr. Hale raised a hand. "Mr. Stanton," she said evenly, "the young lady made a specific claim. Our protocol requires we verify any objection to a presented proof." "This is ridiculous," Stanton snapped. "That woman was serving me coffee 2 hours ago. She probably can't balance a checkbook." Dr. Hale's gaze sharpened. "Mathematics doesn't depend on uniforms, Mr. Stanton. If she's mistaken, verification will show it." A technician projected the proof onto the central screen. Rows of numbers glowed across the stage like constellations. Elena's heart hammered in her chest. She could see every line, every symbol exactly as it had been scribbled on the napkin. She stepped closer, ignoring the tremble in her fingers. "In equation 7, she began, voice steadying with each word, "you assume positive iteration to define the convergence limit. But in step 12, you reverse the sign while maintaining the same asymptotic behavior. The function diverges instead of converging." Her hand moved to the whiteboard beside the projection. She borrowed a marker from a stunned technician and began writing with quick, fluid strokes. "If the iteration remains positive, the sequence approaches positive infinity along this path." She drew a graceful curve ascending toward the edge of the board. "But negative iteration flips the approach. The limit isn't 0 as your proof states. It tends to 2.807. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then one of the contestants, Dr. Ethan Zhao from MIT, frowned and started punching numbers into his tablet. Dr. Amelia Rhodes from Oxford opened her laptop, fingers flying. Dr. Daniel Price from Harvard adjusted his glasses and leaned toward the screen. "She's right," Ethan said finally, voice low but caught by the microphone. "The asymptotic behavior changes completely with the sign reversal." The murmurs spread like wildfire. Dr. Hale took her own tablet, verifying quickly, then looked up at Stanton. "The correction is mathematically sound. The sign convention error invalidates the proof's core argument." Stanton's face flushed a deep crimson. "Impossible," he spat. "My team at Stanford reviewed this. At Caltech, Princeton, they all confirmed." "Sometimes," Elena said softly, "the most obvious errors hide in plain sight, especially when you're too close to the problem." The words landed like a slap. For the first time in 15 years, Gregory Stanton had been challenged, successfully, on his own stage. Cameras zoomed in on his expression, capturing the microsecond when arrogance turned to fury. Social media exploded. On giant screens outside in the plaza, tweets scrolled faster than anyone could read them. "Waitress corrects billionaire's math live on TV." Hashtag Waitress Genius began trending across platforms within minutes. Dr. Hale, sensing chaos, lifted her microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, according to the competition charter, Any valid objection to a presented proof grants the challenger entry into the formal contest. Miss Brooks, are you prepared to compete? The words barely registered. Elena's brain buzzed with disbelief. Compete? She had no credentials, no preparation. But the part of her that had spent years buried under bills and regret stirred awake. She hesitated, glancing at Stanton's glare. I'm ready. A murmur rippled through the audience, half astonishment, half applause. Then, said Dr. Hale, turning toward Stanton, we will proceed according to protocol. Stanton's jaw tightened. Fine. Let's see how far she gets. He adjusted his cufflinks, that habitual motion of control. If this woman thinks she can challenge me, she'll regret it. Technicians scrambled to prepare an extra workstation on stage. A fresh whiteboard was wheeled out. A seat labeled Independent Challenger was placed beside the three contestants. Elena stood awkwardly, unsure whether to sit or remain standing. Dr. Hale leaned toward her. Take your time, Miss Brooks. You're doing fine. Thank you, Elena whispered. The kindness steadied her. The audience watched in restless fascination. No one could look away. The story had become more than mathematics. It was class, pride, humiliation reversed in real time. From her new seat, Elena could see the other contestants up close. Daniel Price kept his expression polite but distant. Amelia Rhodes gave a small sympathetic smile. Ethan Zhao met her eyes briefly and mouthed, "You've got this." The support sent a tiny spark of courage through her. Dr. Hale stepped forward again. For fairness, the main competition will now begin. Each contestant will face a new set of problems escalating in difficulty. Miss Brooks will participate alongside them. Lights dimmed, screens flickered, and the crowd quieted to a charged silence. Stanton crossed his arms, watching like a hawk who already smelled blood. Before the problems began, Dr. Hale addressed the audience. This competition celebrates not only intelligence, but the courage to question assumptions. Mathematics advances when we challenge what we believe to be true. Her gaze lingered briefly on Elena before she turned back to the board. The words warmed Elena's chest. For years, she had lived small, apologizing for brilliance that frightened people. Now, for the first time since leaving MIT, she felt the weight lift. Maybe this moment, impossible, absurd, terrifying, wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was what she was meant to do. During setup, Stanton moved closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You've embarrassed me once, Miss Brooks. It won't happen again. Elena met his eyes. Then perhaps you should check your math more carefully. He blinked, surprised by her composure, then turned away sharply. When the spotlight shifted back to the stage, the cameras captured every detail. The billionaire's controlled fury, the waitress's quiet resolve. It was more than a competition now. It was a duel between privilege and perseverance. In the front row, reporters typed furiously. The hashtag count climbed into the millions. Outside, crowds pressed against screens, watching history bend. Inside Elena's mind, numbers began to dance again. Equations she hadn't touched in years resurfaced like old friends. The nervousness turned into focus. She barely noticed the applause when Dr. Hale introduced the first official problem. This was only a preliminary test before the final challenge, but Elena's hands itched to begin. She solved the warm-up in half the allotted time, her marker flowing across the board with the rhythm of music. When she stepped back, her solution gleamed under the lights. Precise, elegant, simple. The other contestants looked over, startled. Dr. Price muttered, "Well, that's efficient." Amelia Rhodes laughed softly. "Elegant, actually." Ethan Zhao grinned. I told you she's good. Gregory Stanton's smile never reached his eyes. Don't get comfortable, Miss Brooks. Those were the easy rounds. The next challenge would come later, but already the audience sensed something shifting. The billionaire's certainty had cracked. The waitress had become the story. Between rounds, Dr. Hale approached Elena again. Do you need a break? Some water? Elena shook her head. I'm fine. You have remarkable composure, Hale said. Most contestants trained months for this. You walked in off the street. I've been training for this my whole life, Elena said softly. Dr. Hale smiled. Then let's see where that takes you. As the technicians reset the stage, Stanton leaned toward his microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, mathematics is about proof, not luck. Tonight's entertainment aside, real genius requires discipline. The jab was obvious. The audience murmured, sensing tension. Elena ignored him. Her gaze drifted upward to the massive screen showing live feeds of social media reactions. Thousands of messages poured in from viewers around the world. Some cheering, some mocking, some simply awed. She's brave. She's crazy. She's the real deal. For the first time in years, Elena didn't feel invisible. From her seat, she glanced toward the back rows where ordinary spectators sat. Waiters, janitors, students, tired parents. People like her. People who had been told to stay quiet, stay small. The thought filled her chest with something fierce and bright. Dr. Hale's voice called her back to focus. Contestants, prepare for the formal challenge rounds. Miss Brooks, you've earned your place on this stage. From here, every question will test the limits of human reasoning. Elena nodded. Then I'll give it everything I have. Stanton smirked. Good, because you're about to learn how far that isn't. As the applause swelled again, the competition lights dimmed to a single beam over the main board. Elena closed her eyes for a heartbeat, breathing in the electric stillness. Somewhere beyond the cameras, beyond the bright lights and polished marble, she could almost hear her grandmother's voice. Remember, child, numbers never lie. People do, but numbers don't. She opened her eyes and felt the fear settle into determination. No matter how many millions were watching, no matter how much Stanton wanted her to fail, she would not run this time. When the first equation of the next challenge appeared on the screen, the crowd gasped at its complexity. Stanton watched her with the calm cruelty of a man sharpening a blade. Elena lifted her marker. The world narrowed to whiteboard and ink, the old rhythm returning like music she had never forgotten. Her mind clicked into patterns, seeing not chaos but design. Somewhere behind her, a journalist whispered, "She's not supposed to be here." Another answered, "Maybe that's exactly why she is." As symbols filled the board and the timer ticked down, a strange silence settled over Lincoln Center. The silence that falls when arrogance meets its reckoning. And though no one could have known it yet, this was only the beginning of the storm that would make Elena Brooks a name the world would never forget. The air inside Lincoln Center felt charged, alive with the tension that only arrogance and defiance can create. The audience had come expecting equations. What they got was theater, brilliance colliding with power under the white heat of cameras. Elena Brooks stood beside the great whiteboard, her hands faintly trembling, though her expression was calm. Gregory Stanton was no longer amused. He circled her like a storm, his smile too perfect, his words coated in ice. "Impressive show, Miss Brooks," he said smoothly, his voice amplified by the microphone. "But anyone can point out a sign error. That doesn't make you a mathematician. It makes you lucky." Elena didn't look at him. She stared instead at the equations glimmering on the screen. The faint scent of ozone from the stage lights mixed with the perfume of the audience, creating a surreal atmosphere. Dr. Margaret Hale, ever composed, stepped forward. "Mr. Stanton, competition regulations state that Miss Brooks has earned the right to continue. Her correction was not arithmetic, it was conceptual. That qualifies as a valid advancement." Stanton's smile hardened. "Of course, Doctor. But if we're going to bend rules tonight, let's make it interesting." He turned toward the cameras, every gesture perfectly rehearsed for global television. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've witnessed something unusual. A waitress interrupting a mathematical challenge and getting lucky once. Let's see if lightning strikes twice." The murmuring crowd leaned in. They could smell something coming. Dr. Hale frowned. "Mr. Stanton, this competition is not a spectacle. The problems are designed to reveal genius." Stanton interrupted, voice rising. "And genius, Doctor, demands stakes." He walked to the judge's table, whispered something to his lawyers. They typed furiously on their tablets, lines of text and numbers flashing across screens. Then he turned back to the audience. "I'm modifying my challenge," he declared. Dr. Hale stiffened. "That's highly irregular." "Not illegal," Stanton countered. "The rules allow it if all parties consent. Tonight I double my wager, $100 billion. Everything I own, plus my company's combined assets." Gasps rippled through the room like wind through glass. Even the cameramen froze. Elena blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. Stanton's eyes locked on hers. "But this time Miss Brooks doesn't face one problem. She faces three. And she gets 60 minutes total." The audience erupted. Phones lifted. Live streams lit up across the world. The story had already been viral. Now it was history. Dr. Hale moved between them, her voice sharp. "This is absurd. You're turning a scientific event into a circus." "Science," Stanton said, "is built on courage. Let's see if she has any." The microphones caught the faint intake of Elena's breath. She could hear her pulse, could feel the vibrations of hundreds of cameras focusing on her face. In the crowd, whispers grew louder. "She'll never do it. It's impossible. He'll destroy her." And then she spoke, quietly but with absolute clarity. "I accept." The words cut through the noise like a blade. Dr. Hale turned sharply. "Miss Brooks, you don't understand." "I understand," Elena said. I fail publicly, but if I succeed, the world changes." Her voice didn't waver. Stanton's smirk faltered for the first time. The lawyers scrambled to rewrite contracts. Reporters filmed the documents being printed, signed, notarized. Every legal detail flashed on the giant screens, proof of authenticity. The challenge was official. 3 research-level problems, 60 minutes, $100 billion at stake. Dr. Hale pulled Elena aside as technicians rearranged the stage. "You don't have to do this," she said, tone urgent now. "You've already proven your intelligence. Don't let him humiliate you again." Elena shook her head. "There's shame in silence, not in trying." Hale studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then may mathematics be kind." When the cameras went live again, Stanton addressed the audience like a general before battle. "We'll witness the difference between genius and delusion. When this woman fails, and she will, remember that mathematics rewards rigor, not fantasy." The audience murmured. Some nodded, others frowned. The world's mathematicians tuned in from universities and labs, their coffee cups forgotten, their chat windows filling with arguments. Could this waitress possibly last 10 minutes? The timer appeared on the screen. 60 Hautul. A single beep echoed through the auditorium. "Contestants," Dr. Hale announced, "begin." Elena inhaled slowly, steadying her shaking hand as the first envelope was placed before her. She tore it open. Problem 1. Advanced Probability Theory with Quantum Applications. She read it once, twice. Her brain began mapping patterns automatically. The other contestants immediately started scribbling equations. Dr. Daniel Price mumbled about eigenstates. Dr. Amelia Rhodes constructed dense matrices. Ethan Zhao adjusted his calculator and started crunching probabilities. Elena didn't move. For 30 seconds, she just stared. The crowd thought she was frozen. Stanton folded his arms smugly. Then her marker touched the board. She began writing, not at the top where everyone else started, but near the center, building her logic backward. Her voice was barely audible. This isn't a pure probability problem, it's disguised Markov behavior. Within minutes, her equations formed an elegant chain. She skipped entire steps the others struggled with, collapsing 17 variables into 5. The room filled with the rhythmic squeak of markers and the sharp ticking of the countdown clock. At the 12-minute mark, she stepped back, checked her work once, and capped the pen. "I'm done." The announcement sent a ripple through the hall. Dr. Price looked over and frowned. "Already?" Amelia Rhodes glanced at Elena's board, eyes widening. She bypassed the entire second layer of conditions. Ethan Zhao whispered into his microphone, "She's not guessing. She's seeing the structure." Dr. Hale walked to Elena's station. Her expression softened as she examined the equations. "It's correct," she said quietly. "Efficient and correct." Applause broke out from one corner of the hall, hesitant at first, then spreading. Stanton didn't join in. He simply smiled, the cold, controlled smile of a man plotting retaliation. "Well done," he said. "Let's see how long luck lasts." The second envelope was delivered. Elena's palms were damp. She wiped them on her apron, the absurdity of the gesture making her want to laugh. Problem 2, topological manifolds and differential geometry. Her heart gave a strange twist. This was her territory. Her abandoned thesis at MIT had explored new mappings in topology. The problem on the paper was like meeting an old friend in an unfamiliar city. She began almost immediately. Her approach was unlike anyone else's. While Dr. Price built equations line by line, she drew curves and shapes first, mapping conceptual space. She used Riemann mapping in reverse, something even graduate students rarely attempted. Ethan Zhao stopped working to watch. "She's redefining the manifold," he murmured. "That's actually brilliant." Cameras zoomed in on her board. The symbols looked like art, fluid and symmetrical. Dr. Hale tilted her head, recognition dawning. Elena wasn't solving through brute calculation. She was feeling the geometry, translating intuition into form. Halfway through, Stanton seized the microphone again. "Before our audience gets too emotional," he said, "let's be transparent. My sources at MIT inform me that Miss Brooks was dismissed for academic misconduct. Plagiarism, specifically." The statement dropped like a bomb. The crowd gasped. Elena froze mid-equation. Her marker hovered inches from the board. "That's not true," she whispered, but her microphone barely picked it up. "Oh, it's true enough," Stanton continued, voice smooth as oil. "That's why she never completed her doctorate. It seems tonight's performance fits a pattern." Murmurs spread through the hall. On social media, the tone shifted instantly. Waitress fraud, MIT scandal resurfaces. News outlets began calling their sources. Within seconds, MIT expulsion trended worldwide. Elena's breathing quickened. The board blurred. Her throat tightened. She could feel the old shame rising again, the helplessness of losing everything because of money, not misconduct. Dr. Hale stepped forward, eyes sharp. "Mr. Stanton, Unless you have documentation, such accusations are unethical. You will retract that statement. I'm merely sharing public information, he replied, feigning innocence. Then provide it, Hale said. Silence. He couldn't. She turned to Elena. Miss Brooks, please continue. Elena forced herself to breathe. Numbers, she reminded herself. Numbers don't lie. People do. Her hand began to move again, slowly at first, then faster. The pain turned into focus, sharper than any motivation she'd ever known. She reached the final step of her proof, completed the transformation, and circled the result. Dr. Hale examined the work. Extraordinary, she said softly. You used curvature redefinition to bypass the boundary problem. No one's done that before. Even the other contestants clapped this time. Amelia Rhodes shook her head in wonder. That's not luck, she whispered. That's vision. Elena turned towards the crowd. The doubt was still there in some faces, but others had begun to lean forward. Curious, inspired, maybe, just maybe, they wanted her to win. Stanton's jaw tightened. He whispered to one of his lawyers, who began frantically messaging someone in the front row. The scoreboard showed 2 problems solved, 1 remaining. Time elapsed, 33 minutes. Dr. Hale opened the 3rd envelope. Final challenge, she announced. Problem 3. The infinite bridge paradox. The words drew a hush from the crowd. The infinite bridge was Stanton's masterpiece, the culmination of years of research. Entire university departments had failed to solve it. Elena studied the paper. Her mind began connecting threads almost immediately. But as she reached for her calculator, the screen flickered and died. She tapped it once. Nothing. Again, dead. Stanton's voice oozed mock sympathy. Technical difficulties happen. Perhaps we should postpone until she has proper tools. The audience laughed nervously. I don't need a calculator, Elena said quietly. Mathematics existed long before machines. Her hand gripped the marker. She started writing again. Her thoughts moved faster than her voice could keep up. The equations were monstrous, weaving number theory, topology, and convergence analysis together. Sweat trickled down her temple. Behind her, the audience alternated between awe and disbelief. Journalists whispered, mathematicians took notes, students in faraway countries live-streamed on laptops. The world had stopped to watch. 20 minutes left. Her hand ached. Her handwriting grew unsteady. In the front row, Stanton leaned back. This is what happens when desperation meets reality, he said, loud enough for the microphones to catch. Watch her collapse. Dr. Hale's glare could have cut glass, but Elena barely heard him anymore. The stage, the cameras, the audience, everything dissolved into silence. There was only mathematics. Pure, perfect mathematics. Then, halfway through a line of calculation, she paused. Something wasn't fitting. The problem wasn't the math. It was the framework itself. Her brain flashed back to MIT nights, to pages covered in scribbles that never made sense until she looked at them sideways. Patterns within patterns. Maybe this problem wasn't meant to be solved by traditional logic. Her pulse quickened. She changed perspective, flipping the problem on its head. Instead of solving one impossible equation, she split it into 3 interlinked systems, bridges between disciplines. Each incomplete on its own, but together they could describe something larger. The whiteboard filled with curves, spirals, and equations that connected like circuitry. Dr. Hale stepped closer, recognition dawning in her eyes. She's not computing, Hale whispered. She's creating. 15 minutes left. The audience was utterly silent now. Even Stanton had stopped speaking. Elena moved to the far corner of the board and drew the final bridge, a synthesis of the first two, a symbolic map of infinity folding back on itself. She exhaled shakily. "It's all connected," she murmured. The timer blinked. 12 out. Her body trembled with exhaustion. Sweat soaked the collar of her uniform, but her eyes were alight with something beyond fatigue. Clarity. Stanton's smirk returned. "We'll see how long that clarity lasts." He turned toward the crowd. "When she fails, remember, mathematics doesn't reward emotion." Elena ignored him. The numbers on the board weren't emotion. They were life. They were her proof that even a forgotten mind could still reach for beauty. The final seconds ticked down. Cameras zoomed in on her hand as she wrote the last equation. Each stroke felt heavier than the last, but she didn't stop. At 0001, she dropped the marker. The whiteboard stood before her, covered in connections that no one had seen before. 3 problems woven into one coherent structure. The infinite bridge wasn't solved. It was redefined. She turned slowly to face the crowd. "This isn't a paradox," she said quietly. "It's a map of infinity." Silence. Then the auditorium erupted. Applause thundered through the hall. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed. The other contestants stood in disbelief. Dr. Hale stepped forward, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. "Miss Brooks," she said softly, "what you've done here, this isn't just correct, it's revolutionary." Elena swayed slightly, dizzy from adrenaline and exhaustion. Behind them, Stanton's face had gone pale. For the first time all evening, the man who believed he could not be wrong had nothing to say. And somewhere, across millions of screens around the world, people who had been underestimated all their lives watched and whispered one thought: "Maybe it's our turn now." The applause did not sound like celebration. It sounded like thunder breaking after a storm, wild, uncontrollable, uncertain where to land. For a few stunned seconds, no one in the Lincoln Center auditorium moved. The great whiteboard glowed beneath the spotlights, covered from corner to corner in Elena Brooks's looping handwriting. Lines of ink crossed, curved, merged. It was not the language of equations anymore. It looked like music written in symbols. Elena's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. Her arms felt heavy, her fingers sticky with the black dust of markers. She could barely hear the crowd through the rush of blood in her ears. The timer had stopped at 0. She had done it, or thought she had. But even as the cheers grew louder, a ripple of unease moved through the room. Something was happening behind the judge's table. Dr. Margaret Hale, still standing near the center, had just received a message on her tablet. Her brow furrowed. She read once, then again, lips tightening. Beside her, Gregory Stanton noticed and leaned closer, suspicion flashing across his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Hale said, raising a hand for silence. Her voice carried through the hall, firm yet uncertain. "I've just received an urgent communication from the International Mathematics Consortium. It concerns tonight's final challenge." The audience quieted instantly. Even the cameramen froze. Elena turned toward her, confusion flickering across her tired face. The air changed temperature. The lights suddenly felt hotter. Dr. Hale glanced at her screen again. "The consortium informs us that the infinite bridge paradox, presented by Mr. Stanton, was designed as part of a closed-door research program to test the boundaries of computation. According to their documentation, the problem is, by design, unsolvable through manual calculation. It requires quantum-assisted processing to reach a result." A low murmur rippled across the audience. Elena blinked, not understanding. "Unsolvable?" Her stomach dropped. They further state, Hale continued, that Mr. Stanton's own solution, developed over 3 years, depended on advanced quantum algorithms and AI pattern recognition. No human mathematician has ever solved it unaided. Gasps, then silence again. Even the rustle of paper stopped. Stanton's face stiffened. He looked momentarily exposed, like a magician whose secret had slipped from his sleeve. Dr. Hale went on, her voice tight. This revelation changes the context of tonight's challenge. If the problem was classified as computationally dependent, presenting it without disclosure was a breach of ethical protocol. Stanton straightened. "That's outrageous," he said. "Those were research details, not restrictions. Anyone is free to try." "Try," Hale repeated slowly, "on a problem designed to require a supercomputer." She looked toward Elena, whose eyes were wide and unfocused. The realization struck her like physical pain. All evening, she had believed she was climbing a mountain. Impossibly high, yes, but real. Now she understood the truth. There was no peak. The path ended in air. She had been set up to fall. Around her, the sound of shifting chairs filled the silence. The 3 other contestants had stopped working. Dr. Daniel Price rubbed his temples. "Then there's no point," he muttered. Dr. Amelia Rhodes closed her laptop, whispering, "It was never solvable." Ethan Zhao stared at the board, his expression a mix of awe and pity. Elena's heartbeat grew irregular. Her body, already exhausted, began to shake. She looked at the board, the patterns, the bridges, the curves, and for the first time, they seemed meaningless. If the problem required quantum aid, then her work was just scribbles, coincidence at best, delusion at worst. Stanton stepped forward, voice smooth again. "Well, Dr. Hale, I suppose that settles it. Our waitress gave us a charming performance, but mathematics remains intact." The audience laughed uneasily. No one wanted to be cruel, but the narrative was shifting. Hope had turned back into doubt. Hale raised her hand. "Mr. Stanton, we still have to verify whether Miss Brooks's result has any independent validity." He shrugged. "Verify it all you want. The classification stands. She attempted the impossible." He turned to Elena, his tone soft but dripping poison. "Don't feel bad. Even the brightest minds failed. You were simply out of your depth." Something inside her cracked. She wanted to shout, to tell him that she hadn't cheated, that she had seen something real. But her throat closed. The humiliation she'd buried for years came flooding back. The rejection letters, the bills, the nights crying in the kitchen after losing her scholarship. The feeling of being small in rooms built for men like him. Dr. Hale approached gently. "Miss Brooks," she said in a low voice, "given this information, no one would fault you for stepping away. You've already made history tonight." Elena nodded numbly. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. She turned toward the audience. Some faces watched her with sympathy. Others looked away, embarrassed. Among them she saw Tom Becker, her old manager from Le Bernard, watching on a live stream projected in the lobby. He was shaking his head, mouthing the words, "I knew it." She imagined the phone calls already happening, the headlines writing themselves. "Waitress crumbles under pressure. Billionaire's revenge complete." All of it spinning faster than she could think. "I can't do it," she whispered. Her voice barely reached the microphone. "I thought I could see the solution, but if it's impossible—" She stopped, breath hitching. The crowd grew restless. Some applauded politely, signaling pity. Others began packing their coats. The spectacle was ending. The fairy tale had been an illusion after all. Stanton raised his hand theatrically. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "this is what happens when delusion meets reality. Mathematics demands discipline, not daydreams. Laughter scattered like broken glass. Elena flinched as if struck. The humiliation was total. But then Dr. Hale's voice cut through the noise, calm but firm. "Enough." The single word halted him mid-gesture. Hale stepped closer to Elena. Her expression was not pity but fierce encouragement. "Elena," she said softly, "look at your work. Really look. You haven't been solving 3 separate problems. You've been building something entirely new." Elena blinked, uncomprehending. "What do you mean?" "Mathematics doesn't care about classifications or committees," Hale said. "It cares about truth. You've seen connections no algorithm has ever found. Trust your mind." She gestured toward the board. "Forget the consortium. Forget him. Look at the structure you created." Elena turned. Through the haze of despair, the patterns began to sharpen. Her own writing stared back at her. Bridges between number theory, topology, and convergence. She realized she hadn't followed Stanton's framework at all. She had built her own. Her pulse steadied. She stepped closer to the board, tracing a curve with her finger. Maybe the problem hadn't been impossible. Maybe everyone else had been asking the wrong question. 2 minutes remained on the giant timer still ticking in red at the corner of the screen. Dr. Hale stepped back. "If you stop now, he wins. If you continue, you might redefine mathematics. Your choice." Elena closed her eyes, inhaled, and opened them again. "I'm not done." Gasps spread through the hall. Reporters leaned forward. Cameras zoomed back in. Stanton's face hardened. "She's lost it," he said under his breath. Elena picked up the marker again. Her hand no longer shook. She wiped away a few stray equations, clearing space. Then, with deliberate calm, she began to rebuild. "This problem isn't about reaching a single limit," she said quietly, mostly to herself. "It's about describing how limits relate to each other. It's not an equation, it's a language." She drew a circle, then another intersecting it. Numbers filled the shapes like planets in orbit. Lines connected them. Bridges of logic, not computation. Dr. Hale whispered to the judges, "She's visualizing infinite series as continuous geometry. No one's ever done that." Ethan Zhao stared, awestruck. "She's treating infinity like terrain," he said. "Not as an abstract concept, but a landscape." Elena's voice grew stronger. "Infinity isn't one thing," she said, writing faster now. "There are different kinds. Countable, uncountable, convergent, divergent. We've treated them separately, but they're all connected through transformation." Her marker danced across the board, linking equations into spirals that mirrored galaxies. Sweat trickled down her spine. Her arm ached, but she didn't stop. Stanton's composure cracked. "This is mathematical poetry, not proof," he shouted. "She's drawing pictures." Elena paused, turned to face him. The hall went silent again. "Your elegant solution has one small problem, Mr. Stanton," she said evenly. "You assume that infinity is always infinite." A few mathematicians in the audience gasped. Stanton blinked, momentarily thrown. "What are you talking about?" "In your quantum-assisted proof," Elena continued, "you treated all infinities as equivalent, but they aren't. Some can converge, some can collapse into finite expressions. You missed the bridge that connects them." 90 seconds remained. Her voice quickened. "If infinity can transform into finite behavior, then the paradox dissolves. The bridge isn't impossible. It's dynamic." She turned back to the board, drawing the final arc, uniting all 3 fields. The room seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Hale whispered, "She's synthesizing a unified field for infinite sequences." The other contestants stopped pretending to work. Dr. Price stood open-mouthed. Amelia Rhodes scribbled notes furiously. Ethan Zhao, pride glowing in his eyes, murmured, "She's rewriting everything we know." 30 seconds. Elena stepped back. The whiteboard gleamed under the lights, covered in flowing symmetry. The bridges met at a single point, an elegant simplicity that made even non-mathematicians gasp. "There," she said quietly. "The infinite bridge paradox isn't a paradox at all. It's a map showing how infinities connect." The timer hit 0. For a heartbeat, silence swallowed the room. Then, the world exploded. Applause thundered. Reporters surged forward. Dr. Hale clutched her tablet, running verification software, her lips parted in disbelief. "The reasoning is sound," she breathed. "Not only sound, revolutionary." Cheers rose like a wave, echoing through the vaulted ceiling. Elena barely heard them. Her vision blurred. Her legs trembled. She felt lightheaded, unmoored, as if she were standing on the very bridge she had drawn. Stanton stood frozen. Color drained from his face. His lawyers whispered frantically, but he didn't respond. He was staring at the board, understanding slowly dawning, and with it, fear. Dr. Hale read aloud as confirmation messages pinged across her screen. MIT, Stanford, Princeton, Cambridge, Oxford. Each one verifying the same conclusion. Elena Brooks's framework was mathematically valid. Her discovery opened a new branch of infinite series theory. The crowd roared again, but the celebration was interrupted by another chime from Hale's tablet. Her eyes widened. She raised a hand for quiet. "There's more," she said. "This just arrived from the International Patent Office. They've reviewed Miss Brooks's methodology. Her unified approach to infinity has immediate implications for quantum computing, artificial intelligence optimization, and cryptographic algorithms. Preliminary estimates suggest potential efficiency gains of 300 to 500%. Gasps. Cameras flashed. Stanton's knees almost buckled. His empire, built on algorithms, would become obsolete overnight. Hale continued. "They're requesting immediate documentation to secure intellectual property rights. Projected valuation, $200 billion. The noise was deafening. Reporters shouted over one another. The other contestants began photographing the board before anyone could erase it. Mathematicians in the audience were already sending emails to colleagues, calling it the Brooks framework. Dr. Hale's voice trembled slightly as she added, "The consortium also reveals that tonight's event doubled as a talent identification initiative. They were searching for minds capable of intuitive reasoning beyond computational limits. Miss Brooks, they've invited you to lead a new research institute, fully funded, to study intuitive mathematics." Elena's mind reeled. It was too much. The noise, the lights, the magnitude of what had happened. She wanted to laugh and cry at once. But all attention shifted back to Gregory Stanton. The man who had humiliated her, who had bet his fortune on arrogance, now faced the truth written across the board. Cameras zoomed in on his face. Lawyers whispered frantic suggestions, claim misrepresentation, question legality, delay. But something in Stanton's posture changed. For the first time, he looked small. He approached the board slowly, studying every line. The room fell into absolute silence as he traced one of the curves with his fingertip, his expression unreadable. Minutes passed. Finally, he turned to her. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly, voice rough, "your solution is correct, completely correct." He swallowed hard. "I built my career on being right about mathematics. Tonight I learned how to be wrong, with dignity." Applause erupted again, louder than before. Elena didn't smile. She simply nodded, the exhaustion finally catching up to her. The noise faded around her as if she were underwater. In the lobby outside, screens showed millions of viewers cheering. In diners, nursing homes, and classrooms around the world, people watched in awe. A waitress had beaten a billionaire not through revenge, but through brilliance. Elena looked once more at the whiteboard. It was beautiful, not because it proved her right, but because it proved something deeper. That genius can bloom anywhere if given the light. Dr. Hale touched her shoulder. "Rest now," she said softly. "You've crossed the bridge." The storm of applause had not yet died when the lights of Lincoln Center began to dim. Reporters were still shouting questions, camera flashes still blooming like fireworks, but Elena Brooks no longer heard them. Her body was drained, her thoughts adrift somewhere between disbelief and exhaustion. It was as if her mind, having climbed to the highest peak of reason, now needed air to breathe again. Dr. Margaret Hale guided her away from the stage. "Easy," she said softly. "Let's get you some water." The hallway beyond the curtains felt almost unreal, too quiet after the roar of thousands. Technicians moved around her like ghosts, carrying cables, whispering into headsets. Some smiled shyly at her as she passed. One young intern mouthed "thank you" before darting away. They entered a small lounge filled with harsh white light and half-empty coffee cups. Elena sank onto a couch, hands trembling. The marker ink still clung to her fingertips, black smudges like battle scars. Her chest hurt from breathing too fast. Dr. Hale crouched beside her. "You did it, Elena," she said, her voice a mixture of awe and maternal pride. "You truly did it." Elena stared at the floor. "Did I?" she whispered. "I don't even understand what just happened. They said it was impossible." Hale smiled faintly. "It was until you made it possible. That's what discovery feels like. Confusing, terrifying, beautiful." Footsteps echoed in the corridor. A journalist poked his head in. "Miss Brooks, CNBC is requesting—" "Not now," Hale said sharply. She shut the door and turned back. "You don't owe them a headline tonight. Just breathe." Elena nodded, but couldn't quite stop the trembling. In her pocket, her phone buzzed nonstop. Hundreds of notifications. Her grandmother's number flashed first. She answered with shaking fingers. "Sweetheart?" The old woman's voice cracked with tears. "Is it true? Are they saying your name on television?" Elena smiled, tears welling. "Yes, Grandma, it's true." "I knew it," the old woman said between sobs. "I told your father you were born with numbers in your blood. You just needed someone to listen." The words undid her. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The memory of late nights in that tiny Queens apartment flooded back. Her grandmother sitting by the window, counting change for groceries while Elena scribbled formulas in the margins of newspapers. "I love you," Elena whispered. "I'll come home tomorrow. I promise." After she hung up, Hale handed her a bottle of water. "Drink," she said. "You'll need your strength. The world is waiting outside those doors." Outside, the world indeed was waiting. By the time Elena re-emerged, the plaza in front of Lincoln Center looked like New Year's Eve. News vans crowded the street, reporters speaking into cameras under umbrellas of light. Spectators chanted her name. Some held up handmade signs already scrawled with hashtags, #Waitress Genius, #Mathematics Doesn't Care. Gregory Stanton stood near the steps surrounded by his lawyers. When he saw her, the crowd parted instinctively. The billionaire looked older now, his arrogance replaced by something weary but human. He walked toward her slowly, past the microphones and flashing bulbs. "Elena Brooks," he said, his voice low, "I owe you an apology and a fortune." She met his gaze steadily. I didn't do it for money. I know, he said. That's why you deserve it. For a second, they simply looked at each other, predator and prey no longer. Then he extended his hand. His voice trembled almost imperceptibly. I was wrong. About mathematics, about power, about people like you. She hesitated, then shook his hand. It felt less like forgiveness than closure. The cameras caught the moment, the handshake that would be replayed across every network in the world. Behind them, Dr. Hale addressed the press. Tonight, she said, we witnessed more than a competition. We witnessed humility learning from brilliance. The words rippled through the crowd, but Elena barely heard. She felt light, almost transparent, as though her body were finally catching up to her soul. By morning, every headline carried her name. Waitress outsmarts billionaire. Mathematical revolution shakes tech industry. The Brooks Framework, redefining infinity. Talk show hosts argued about her on split screens. Some praised her genius. Others questioned how a dropout could eclipse elite institutions. But none could ignore her. The impossible woman had become a global symbol overnight. Her email filled with invitations, conferences, interviews, book deals. MIT offered to reinstate her doctorate immediately. The International Consortium requested that she lead their new initiative on intuitive mathematics. For 2 days, she barely slept. Hale insisted she rest in a hotel near Central Park, away from the noise. The city outside buzzed with the electricity of her victory. Tourists took selfies near the restaurant where it had all begun. Le Bernard hung a sign in its window. We served the genius. Tom Becker, the manager who had scolded her, now told reporters he had always seen potential. Elena watched one of his interviews on TV and laughed softly. People rewrite history fast, she said to Hale, who was sitting nearby reviewing emails. They always do, Hale replied. History prefers tidy narratives, but truth is rarely tidy. Elena looked out the window at the park below, autumn leaves spinning in sunlight. For so long, she said, I thought my life was over. I was just surviving. Hale closed her tablet. Maybe surviving was the training, she said. Humility sharpens intuition in ways privilege never can. 2 weeks later, she walked through the glass doors of the new Institute for Intuitive Mathematics. Her name, Dr. Elena Brooks, was already etched beside Hale's on the entrance plaque. She touched it briefly, half expecting to wake from a dream. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Dozens of young researchers waited in the atrium. Students from community colleges, single parents, immigrants, people overlooked by the traditional system. Hale had handpicked them all. This institute isn't about credentials, Hale said during the first orientation. It's about minds that see differently. Elena watched their faces glow with the same hope she once thought extinct in herself. When she spoke, her voice carried quietly but firmly. I used to think genius belonged only to people with degrees and money, but genius lives everywhere, in dishwashers, in nurses, in cab drivers calculating change faster than machines. It just needs someone to see it. The room erupted in applause. Somewhere in the back, a shy young woman wiped tears from her eyes. Afterward, Hale found Elena standing in front of a whiteboard covered with new equations. You're already working, Hale teased. I can't help it, Elena said with a tired grin. It feels like coming home. She picked up a marker and drew a curve, not as a solution, but as a promise. Every discovery, she said, starts with curiosity disguised as defiance. Months passed. Winter melted into spring. The Brooks Framework spread through research circles like wildfire. Tech companies rushed to adapt it. Quantum labs reported breakthroughs in efficiency. AI developers claimed her equations had opened doors to new learning architectures. Gregory Stanton, now retired from public view, sold most of his holdings and quietly funded scholarships under Elena's Institute. He never sought the spotlight again. When journalists asked why, he answered simply, "Because I met the truth, and she wore an apron." Elena refused to gloat. When she was invited to talk shows, she spoke instead about education reform, about giving second chances to those who couldn't afford tuition. Her calm voice carried more power than any boast. On stage, under soft lights, she often told the same story. "Mathematics doesn't care about your uniform," she would say. "It only cares about your courage to see what others cannot." Each time she said it, the audience rose in silence before applauding, not for celebrity, but for recognition of their own hidden potential. One quiet evening, 6 months after the competition, Elena returned to Le Bernard. The restaurant looked smaller now, its elegance dulled by memory. Tom Becker greeted her at the door, nervously straightening his tie. "Dr. Brooks, what an honor." "Please," she interrupted gently. "Just Elena." He nodded, flustered. "I saved your old table. Thought you might want to see it." She smiled and followed him through the familiar maze of tables. The chandeliers still glowed the same way, but the room felt different, as though the air itself remembered. At table 12, she stopped. For a moment, she saw herself again, kneeling on the floor, water pooling around the shattered glass. She felt the echo of humiliation in the quiet spark that had followed. On the table sat a framed photo, her standing at the Lincoln Center whiteboard, marker in hand, eyes alight. Beside it lay a folded napkin, yellowed, wrinkled, the one she had taken from Stanton's table that night. Tom cleared his throat. "We found that after the press conference," he said. "Figured it belonged to you." She lifted it carefully, tracing the faded ink. A few broken equations still visible, the ghost of his arrogance preserved in smudges. She smiled, not bitterly, but with quiet gratitude. "Thank you," she said. She slipped it into her bag. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the Hudson. Her apartment had changed too. Where once bills and job schedules covered the fridge, now photographs filled it. Her research team laughing over pizza, her grandmother waving a diploma she'd printed online, Ethan Zhao visiting from MIT. On the desk near the window stood a glass frame containing that same napkin. Below it, a handwritten note read, "Genius often whispers where arrogance shouts." Late that night, unable to sleep, she stood by the window, watching the city breathe. The glow of downtown reflected in her eyes. She thought of all the people still unseen, still underestimated, the janitor sweeping a lobby, the cashier calculating change faster than the register, the child scribbling patterns on a page no one would read. Somewhere among them, she thought another miracle was waiting. Her phone buzzed, a message from Dr. Hale. "MIT just nominated you for the Fields Medal. Call me when you stop pretending to be humble." Elena laughed quietly. She typed back, "Numbers are never humble. They just wait for us to catch up." She turned from the window and looked at the whiteboard standing in her living room, still covered in fresh equations. The line she had drawn at the Institute earlier that year, a single curve across the surface, continued here, curling into new ideas. Infinity, she realized, was not distant. It was present, constant, alive in every act of understanding. A year after that fateful night, Lincoln Center hosted a commemorative event titled The Bridge of Infinities. Scholars, students, and dreamers filled the same auditorium where she had once stood trembling. This time, Elena walked onto the stage not as an intruder, but as its rightful heir. Dr. Hale introduced her with quiet pride. "Some bridges," she said, "are built of steel and stone. Others are built of courage. Tonight we honor the woman who taught us that both kinds can change the world." Elena approached the podium. The applause that greeted her was warm, not explosive, the sound of respect rather than shock. She spoke not of equations, but of humanity. "When I cleaned tables, I thought I had lost my place in the world," she said. "But mathematics never left me. Truth waits patiently, even in silence. Sometimes it hides in the hands that pour your water." She paused, smiling at the audience. Never assume brilliance has a dress code. The hall erupted in laughter and tears. When the event ended, she lingered alone on stage. The lights dimmed, leaving only the whiteboard illuminated. She walked to it, drew a small infinity symbol in the corner, and beneath it wrote, "For those still unseen." Later that night, as she left the building, she passed a group of high school students gathered by the steps. One girl ran up, breathless. "Dr. Brooks, I watched your story last year. It made me apply for engineering." Elena smiled and handed her the marker she'd been carrying. "Then keep this," she said. "Every bridge needs a new builder." The girl clutched it like treasure. Elena turned toward the street, the wind cool against her face. The city around her hummed with endless energy. Taxis, laughter, fragments of songs from open windows. It all sounded like numbers to her now, rhythm and sequence disguised as life. As she crossed Columbus Avenue, she glanced once toward the glittering skyline. It shimmered like the graph of a living equation, each light a variable, each shadow a question. Somewhere, someone would find the next answer. She walked on, head high, past the crowds who no longer stared in pity, but in wonder. The waitress who had once been invisible was now the mathematician rewriting reality itself. And yet, she felt no triumph, only gratitude, for every fall that had shaped her, for every unnoticed whisper that had led her here. The camera would fade here if this were film. Her silhouette framed by city light, the quiet rhythm of footsteps merging with the pulse of Manhattan. Her voice would linger, calm and certain. "Mathematics doesn't care about your uniform," she would say. "It only cares about your courage to see what others cannot." The music would rise, gentle and triumphant, and as the screen faded to black, her final words would echo into the dark. "Somewhere right now, another mind is waiting to be seen. Make sure you're not one of the people doing the overlooking."